Yeah, how's the day been? How's the interviews going?
Oh, we just talked to Just Charles.
Wonderful, yeah.
And now we've got you here.
Yeah.
And then next is Marcelo Hernandez Castillo.
Yes, we're on the same panel. I'm so excited.
Are you on?
Yeah.
Right after
With Marcelo
this,
and
a little bit
Palmas.
later tonight.
Yeah,
right?
4:30.
4 o'clock?
Yeah.
4:30?
Okay.
Wait, is it
All right,
4:30 or 4 o'clock?
we're going to that one.
Yeah.
I think it's 4:30. So 4
It's written down somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's 4:30.
Okay.
Okay. Always write down the first thing I'm going to say, otherwise I live like an idiot.
Oh, great, thank you.
That's us.
Oh, wonderful. SoFloPoJo.
SoFloPoJo, and we hope at some
that's
point
us
you
too.
get a chance to send us some work.
Oh, yeah.
Because we will put it in the
Wonderful,
journal.
thank you.
We have some marvelous poets.
Thank you so much, yeah. When I have some new work, definitely. I would love to.
Oh, sweet.
We're here.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'm a little, I'm teaching full time right now, so the new work is kind of
Absolutely. You know, especially
definitely
when a book comes out.
stalled. Yeah, the new book, it's just been like, but I hope to get back to some new work soon. Yeah,
Touring and reading and stuff doesn't leave a whole time.
yeah, I just saw a tweet that Lauren Groff put out that was just like, you know, give yourself a break if you have a book out. There's just like, if you're not writing, just like, it's okay to like be in the presence of the book and just let the book,
Sure.
just enjoy it and not kind of give yourself grief about not writing.
About not writing.
Yeah.
I think if you lay fallow for a little while, it all comes flying out anyway.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer, and I tell my students that reading is writing, revising is writing.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a lot of interviews, questions, and essays, and that's also writing. And sometimes I feel like if I'm not writing a new poem, I'm not like being productive. But no, that's
a part of the process.
That's all a part of it. Yeah, use it all.
When the Miami Book Fair sent us the list of poets that were willing to be interviewed, your title jumps out. I mean, it jumps out.
No.
Was that attached to the beginning of the project? Did that come along, you know, at some point, or because then you use it to structure the book as well?
Yeah. So the kind of first draft of the book, the bones of the book, started in the last year of my MFA program at Vanderbilt, and it was actually my thesis director, Kate Daniels, that came up with the title. And we were going over my long poem, The Rhyme of Nina Simone, and that's a line from that poem. And she was like, "What about that for a title?" And I was like, I was like, "That's a really long title." But as soon as she said it, the book kind of clicked into place, and I just saw that triptych kind of structure. And then I was like, "Oh my gosh," that's because organizing a book can be very difficult sometimes. And so I called it the floor stage, where you have all your poems on the floor, and I've been kind of waiting for a structure to reveal itself to me.
Sure.
And so when she said it, at first I was like, and then I was like, wait, oh, those are my 3 kind of movements, so, and I was like, oh, I can't talk about the trees, about the blood. And I was like, boom. And from there, I kind of created almost like 3 little mini chapbooks within there, and that became kind of the structure, and that helped my mind to kind of put it in categories from there. So once that came to me, it was like the aha moment, and then the book kind of coalesced from there. But I will say, I went through like 1,000 revisions after I graduated from my MFA. A lot of people say, don't publish your book from your MFA. And so I had Danica Kelly on my thesis committee, who went bestiary, and she really took me to task. She was like, okay, tell me about these 3 sections. What's going on? Like, she's like, I think 1 and 2 are great. But she's like, this 3rd one without the blood, what's going on here? And I really couldn't answer her. So I really spent the next summer talking about a fallow period. I took about 4 months. I just kind of buried the book and let it.
Yeah.
Because I think when you graduate from an MFA program, it's important to kind of, your mentor's voices are in your head. It's important to kind of refine and relocate your own voice. And so I kind of had to find the way to trust my own imagination again.
Sure.
And then when I took it back out, I really honed in on each of those sections to make sure that there was kind of a larger arc happening. Because I think if you have, I think there's like 30 plus poems in the book, then like the 38th poem is the whole entire book. And so I wanted all of those kind of arcs to fall into place. Yeah.
I love the fact that the 3rd section is unexpected. You think the book is going in a direction, and then it gets very personal.
Yeah.
Which was unexpected and really wonderful.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for saying that. I really struggled with the 3rd section, so I'm really happy. And that's the one I kind of tinkered around with the most, and so I'm really happy to hear you say that.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, first you start out with, bitch better have my money, and it's like, oh yes.
Yeah, I had to start off. I had to Riri had to start that section for sure.
So I've got the poem in front of me, and I've got Rihanna over here, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yes.
And then you bring up slavery porn, and it brings me back to the Nina Simone section, where Nina is saying they want your black paint.
Yeah.
I'm in awe of the rhyme of Nina Simone.
Thank you.
I took it personally when Nina Simone was so bitter, which is a silly thing, right? I mean, she doesn't know me from Adam.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you spend quite a few pages on it. Where did that come from?
So I kind of have to go back a little bit. So I did not major in English. And the first poetry class I had was in high school, and I kind of had a poet that was like from the Beat generation. And so we really learned a very free verse, very music forward kind of style. I was not really versed in received forms, and I honestly had a very abject relationship to them. And the truth was, I was very afraid of them because I prided myself that. Let me go back. What I'm trying to say is, I think I had this fear that if I did it, like if I tried to really write a sonnet and I failed, then I would be stupid. And I didn't want to be stupid. And when I got to Vanderbilt, there's a formalist poet there, Mark Jarman, and I was really nervous. And I remember one of the first things he asked me, he's like, "Where are the gaps in your reading?" And I was like, "Where are the gaps in my reading?"
You tell me.
Yeah. And I felt I had this huge sense of an imposter syndrome, which I think we'll have for the rest of our life, but where I kind of felt like, I didn't know the history of a lot of these forms. I knew that I loved poetry. I knew that I kind of felt like one of those jazz musicians who could kind of play off ear, but not the sheet music.
Right.
And so I wanted to do independent study with Mark, and I decided to kind of face this fear that I really had for him. And I said, okay, I want to work with you. And he's like, okay, what decade do you want to start in? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, well, what about 18th century British Romantic poetry? And I was like, and I was like, that wasn't like the first like sexy era I was thinking about. But I knew that it was an opportunity, that he was so passionate about it, and that was his love. And I knew that if I encountered kind of, Wordsworth and Coleridge, and kind of really, maybe it would kind of unlock some things for me. Yeah. And so we were reading lyrical ballads, and I had to read the preface beforehand, which was really illuminating. And in the preface, everyone quotes that part about like poetry's the overflow of powerful feelings. But if you go on that quote, it talks about it's written from a place of actually tranquility. So it was like this really weird moment for me, because I often write a lot about slavery, a lot of painful subjects. But my life had been so chaotic actually until I got to the MFA, because I went to a fully funded program. I was really grateful to do that, and to have a safe space to write and encounter this trauma. I was in a state of tranquility to go back and dive into these more difficult subject matter. And so when we got to the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, I was like, oh boy, like here's this big epic. So every week we would read a poem, and I had to respond in a poem. And so we read the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, we talked about it for a long time, and I was just like, ooh, God. I was like, I don't know if I can do like rhyme quatrains. And I'm always asking myself with form, how can I make it my own? How can I learn from the masters? And I'm always big into making and breaking forms. And that's where I found my freedom in form. So I went from fear to freedom in the fact that my imagination actually was this huge fertile playing ground of like looking at the Rime in the Ancient Mariner. And so I saw the mariner stopping the wedding guest, and with this urgent kind of apocalyptic tale. And then I asked myself, like, who would be that person for me? And I had just watched What Happened with Simone on Netflix. And so Nina had been haunting me. I mean, she had not left me. And so I'd always loved Nina Simone before then, but that was kind of a more personal. Have you seen it? Yeah. Oh, it's so good. A personal, and it goes into more of her mental illness, and her rage and her activism and her frustration after the civil rights movement, of kind of, her career tanked because of her activism. anyways, but it's just she'd been kind of haunting me, so I kind of had this like fever dream of a weekend where she just kind of visited me, and I was like, oh, Nina's gonna stop me, and she kind of became this foil or this avatar, in a way to have a conversation with myself.
Right.
And so I feverishly wrote, I think, like 15, 20 pages that weekend. Just like, I honestly was trying to catch up with her. Like, I was just like, she just came, and it was just, I mean, she's so capacious. She's so massive. And so it was this weird thing for me to work through dialogue and almost this kind of play like scene and basically interrogate the lyric self through this kind of huge figure, this pop culture figure. And so for me, that was a way to kind of push the idea of the epic, the ballad forward, thinking about this musical tradition with Nina Simone, thinking about her being the mariner, questioning the speaker. And honestly, it was a way for me to have a conversation about my time and all my fears and insecurities in graduate school.
So interesting.
Yeah, so it kind of all came from that big soup. And then, but revising that poem was the hardest to do. And I honestly was tweaking with it, literally till like my press was like, you have to turn in your book. And I was like, but because I mean, it was like wrestling a hog, because it's the largest poem in the collection, but it's the fulcrum of the whole entire collection. It's a cornerstone poem, and
Right.
I wanted to get it right. And so
It's concept talking to concept
Yeah.
as well as person talking to person,
Yeah.
and to do it in a way that doesn't turn into a term paper
Yeah.
is tough.
yeah,
But you did it.
thank you. Yay! That's so good to hear. Yeah, it's had a lot of different changes throughout the years. So I think it took me about 2.5. I wrote it, and then it took me 2.5 years to revise it. Yeah, and then I was so happy when Terrence Hayes let me have the painting that he did of Nina. So I was really excited that was the cover, because I knew as soon as I won the prize, I was like, this has to be my cover. And they're like, we're gonna warn you, like, Terrence, we don't know, like, you could say no. And then he said yes, and I was like, yay!
Wow.
Yeah, because she definitely haunts the book. So
Yeah.
She's a force of nature. I love her.
Oh God. Yes.
She's iconic.
yeah, definitely check out that documentary. It's so good.
There's moments of trauma that you're laughing in the middle of. I will never have sex. I will never have sex.
Mm-hmm.
Is both trauma and it's kind of hilarious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is a light touch. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
So we're kind of working our way through the book. You have some stuff that is like a forerunner to Me Too poems.
Mhm.
You know, when you look at Cottonmouth and
Mhm.
Dead Bug and Tim.
Mhm.
I love it when you call out Berryman
Mm-hmm.
and say, Henry, you don't have to talk like that anymore. He was one of my first influences. And we sometimes talk about whether he'll survive this age.
Mm.
What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, you know, it's hard because, you know, I'm being taught by the previous generation, and that,
Mhm.
you know, so Berryman and Bishop, those were the great loves. And, you know, when you, as a new poet, you're like so excited because you've heard of these people, you know, I've heard about the dream song, I'm excited to jump in. And then I'm reading this stuff and I'm like, wait a second. You know, like you have this moment as a poet in my generation of just like, well, wait a second, no one prepared me for this, or how do we have conversations for this? And I don't think the answer is canceling Berryman and Bishop or Lowell, but how do we couch these conversations in a context and a history and say, okay, what era did they grow up in?
Yeah.
What beliefs were happening around the 40s and 50s and 60s, and who were their parents? And we allow the space in the classroom to kind of have the concept, have the context, have the poems, and then that's a really interesting way to kind of prepare your students to kind of talk about these things. And because it still is happening today. So, you know, there's a lot of things I learned from Berryman and Bishop, but then when I read Bishop and I'm reading poems like In the Waiting Room, one of my professors loved Bishop. And I feel like he took it so personally when I was like, wait a second, there's a weird kind of colonial gaze here where she's staring at the African breast and she's like terrified. And I was like, I think there's something that doesn't make me, I first feel it in my body, I'm like, something's not right here. Like, let's talk about it. She's having this huge like existential dread, but it's from these black breasts. And I was made to feel often in my graduate school program that but it's Bishop.
Yeah.
You can't besmirch her name.
Right.
You know, and I didn't feel as though I could wrestle with those tougher questions, or with Berryman. And we did talk about blackface a little bit, but there's so many great essays out there by Kevin Young, and even looking at Tahima Jess's book, and like, again, how are we making it new? How are we making it fresh? How are we having these difficult conversations? And I think poems are places to have difficult conversations. And so I think in my poems, they kind of pop up. And so I was thinking, honestly, that Cottonmouth poem is a response actually to a Bishop prompt, which is funny because, like, I never read about animals, so I was like, here's going to be some weird psychosexual kind of looping dream. I was like, here we go. And then Berryman popped up, and I just had this moment of, like, what would it be like to manumit Henry from his mouth? And I did all that, like, and it just kind of just tumbled out, and I felt so good writing it. Like, I was like, I will free Henry. Because there's a part of me that feels that he was, I don't know how deep I want to get to this, but that it seemed so provocative and edgy and brilliant at the time that I was just like, it's so appropriative, and that to me Henry kind of is the voice of the id and all his like primal sexual instincts, and I think it's really problematic that that's couched in kind of this blackface kind of vernacular. I think that's really, let's talk about it. So to me, I did a kind of paper on looking at the dream songs as a minstrel show, with Berryman being the interlocutor and kind of the ego and super ego with all the different characters. And I loved diving into the book in that way, and I love talking about the book in that way. And so, yeah, I'm rambling, but
No.
We have a lot.
It's an area that I think poetry is ahead of the curve on at this point. Poetry, I think, is showing a lot more sensitivity to colonialism and patriotism, paternalism, and I mean, and making room for a lot of different voices.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, for me very refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say, just to add an addendum, that I don't like this. We live in this kind of cancel culture.
Right.
You know, someone says cancel.
Right.
Someone says cancel. That's too easy of a rejoinder. You know, that's too easy. I think
Because it really doesn't cancel anything.
No. And we have to address the past if we want anything to be. We're the current hellscape we're now. If anything will show us, we have to address the past.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, this is a long side story, but I have a friend who had a German exchange student, and they went to go see this horror movie, and it was all these bones underneath the house, and the German foreign exchange student was like, oh, this could never play in Germany. She was like, why? She was like, you know, for us, we would automatically know the kind of cultural significance.
Sure.
Yeah. And she was like, you know, because we've reckoned with the past. Yeah. And she's like, the South has not done that yet.
Yeah.
And I got kind of chills, and so there's a way that I look at that literature of like, we have to reckon with the past first if we want to go forward. We have to learn from the past. We have to talk about it. So if anything, I'm wanting this space to let the room in. Think about the séjour in that sense, like letting room into a poem. I think we have to have that moment in our classrooms when we reconcile with Berryman, and so that when other poems pop up, we can say, wait a second, this has already happened before. You know, I don't know.
In addition to the 3 sections, you have a pretty devastating epilogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just trauma.
No, it's perfect where it's placed. You know, you've already got that scalding iron earlier in the body of the poem. You've got this horrific 800 days, which when I saw the title of the book, I thought it was going to be all 800 days. But in section 3, you come back to your blood.
Yeah.
Do you find any peace with that? Because you're really working on it hard in section 3, you know, yourself.
Yeah. I'm gonna butcher this quote, but there's a really great quote from Ralph Ellison from his essay he did on blues writing, and it talks about fingering the jagged grain. He's talking about the blues consciousness. There's a part in there where he says, this is my rough paraphrase of, it's not one thing to kind of write about the pain, but how do we transcend it? And so I'm reaching towards that, I think, a little bit in the third section. Definitely in my second book, I'm working more towards the type of what would it be like to transcend the pain. But I wanted to bookend the collection with starting with the Nashville poem that ends with that racial epithet, that chase between Apollo and Daphne. And I wanted that to kind of follow up the book. And so it ends with the speaker and me, where the first kind of racial epithet is thrown. And then I wanted to go back to the beginning. And I wanted it to kind of end there. And I wanted to end with that wound, that seared raw but permanent. So it's a wound from the past, but it's always fresh.
Right.
It never heals. And so, and thinking about trauma with the mathematical equation and thinking about the 4 ways to read the poem. And I wanted to end in this really kind of circular fashion where it isn't really resolved because it's not resolved in my body.
Right.
It's something that I have to reckon and reconcile with every day. And so, you know, I have Brooke Kaiser and Gwendolyn Brooks there in the beginning of, you know, in that section. I have lots of epigraphs, but I'm not ashamed about it. I'm not ashamed. You know, but Gwendolyn Brooks, it was important to have that, and that we are not the last of the loud. You know, conduct your blooming in the whip in the I'm butchering that. And we just pull it out before I butchering my own. Oh yeah, conduct your blooming in the noise and whip of the whirlwind. So that to me was again pushing towards that type of transcendence. But yeah, it felt like I wanted to end there. That I wanted those bookends to kind of be present. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty narcissistic, so the self had to come in there towards the end. And I had to reconcile with my own blood, and I had to reconcile, you know, the quote from Ezekiel 16, you know, I think is this kind of baby that's in a field that's supposed to be, I think, representative of Israel, but it's kind of like this bastard baby, and so I wanted to go back to that beginning, you know, of that.
Can you read something from the book?
Sure. What do you want to hear? Just dealer's choice?
Yes, dealer's choice. Definitely.
I'll do Bitch Better Have My Money.
Cool.
After watching the music video. Do I need to look anywhere? Or
There's
Okay.
the
Camera,
main
but you
camera.
don't have to.
Okay. I too want to be naked, zebra striped in the almost dried accountant's blood, sticky and sucking a fat blunt inside a Louis Vuitton suitcase brimming with the newest money. This is another way to see myself too. In the way Rihanna nooses a white woman up by her smooth feet, a blue-blooded pendulum swaying as her beautiful tits look more perfect than ever. Why did that image excite me so? No, not the tits, but the simulated lynching. It feels so damn delicious to say bitch. Bitch better. Bitch better have my money inside my mouth. I hate it when people talk about black artists being capitalists. Why can't we thrive in something rich and green too? And let us be loud about it. Let us be loud without consequence. Remember when we were dating, I wanted you to pay for every meal. And yes, the movies taught me that love was someone reaching for the check first. But there is no such thing as a free lunch. Someone has to pay with the fruit from their body. Yeah, I'm spreading my legs for someone else because I'm hungry and always at the end of some kind of altar. Even now, I'm paying for my doctor to reach and scrape inside me to say I don't have cancer. She tells me I need to start thinking about babies because of my age. I think, bitch, I'm not ready. There will always be tithes and offerings. At my church, they called it first fruits. My mother gave me quarters, and as a kid, I waited for the clink at the bottom of the bucket being passed. I believe God heard this too. Somewhere, someone is counting the cash behind a velvet curtain. Once, a boy said, "Suck it, bitch," with his heavy, dense hand at the back of my head, pushing. Pushing is another way to mean pay me what you owe me. I didn't forget. Yeah, I see the total at the bottom of the receipt. I have so much debt. I am forever in the wettest red.
It's got some jazz in it.
Thank you.
That's got some jazz in it. And you know, you talk about fruit in there, and I just can't help think of
Strange fruit.
yeah, exactly. You know, Lady Day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then, you know, Nina Simone, and of course, excellent.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for the thoughtful engagement with the text. And also you're just personally making me feel so good about all my choices because you when you write the book, you're just in this echo chamber, like should I do this or this, and you feel this instinct, and you I always tell my students like lean into your instincts.
Yeah. Well, you hit it there. It's out there and it's being picked up because you did it. And it's really, really
so
good.
I appreciate the validation because like everyone, I also need approval. But
We all do. We all do.
yes, thank you for the wonderful interview and the kind words. Yeah,
I really appreciate you taking the time.
of course, I'm so excited. Yeah.
We hope to see you later on.